with any motor race, it doesn't happen if you haven't got officials. So John Brownsey, who was an official at that event, if you'd like to just come up and give us a little bit of a background into the official side of it.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's only happened 5 minutes ago. I'd just like to bring on a little bit, you were talking about Bernie Eccleston. I remember I was in the pits one day, because I was some sort of a marshal in the pits, and I was doing the grid as well. But Bernie came into the pits, and on the second pit area he stopped dead and he pointed and he said, "What's that drink machine doing there?" That's how astute he was. He knew that that machine was not a licensed machine for the Grand Prix and it had to go. So that's an example of how astute a man he really was. On the other hand, we're talking about officials, and I remember one year there were a few people came out from England, as have already been mentioned, but there was a young lady who was on the grid, and after the cars had been gridded up, you of course had to get off very quickly. And for her, this meant rolling over the top of the cement barrier, which for a lady could be fairly painful. And she mentioned this to me, and I brought it up with the officials. They corrected that and they took me off the grid. So those were the days. I became involved with the club when I was 18. My grandmother gave me the membership fee, and I was in motorsport just like that. And this was just when the announcement came out about Malala. I'd been to Port Wakefield, but this was a brave step forward, and a really brave one when you look at what went on. And so I volunteered for whatever they wanted me to do, and that was fine. And at the first meeting, I had to look after spectators, which was quite interesting because you got to see most of the track that way. And I can distinctly remember seeing Clem Smith come down the straight, which of course was really a curve, and he was sideways most of the way down the straight. And I think one day, not at that meeting, he went off in grand style because his Holden had Michelin tyres, which lasted a long while. It didn't grip very well. The gaining of the club was asked to provide the spectator marshals, or the officials, and spectator marshals were really very important because they had some worries about the crowds and hoping they wouldn't jump the fence and think they could do what they liked. But that created a nucleus within the club of people who were involved. And certainly in those days, prior to a race meeting on the Wednesday night, everybody that was involved would come along to the Sporting Car Club, the former club rooms, and we'd get our jobs. And this was a really big deal, the biggest deal of the year for many of these people, being appreciated, finding out who they were going to be mates with for a couple of days. And it worked very well for the club, and it's a pity that it's gone from us because it was a feature of life and being involved almost at grassroots. We of course were in teams. It wasn't just spectator marshals, it was the officials on the corners and so on. And when you look at what's the positions they took up on corners, it's just amazing that more weren't hurt at the end of the day. I was nearly cleaned up one day, and I know Rolly Jones really got hit one day by a car that didn't quite stop in a straight line. So certainly the officials were the backbone of these events, and they were the backbone of volunteers within the club. It's virtually impossible to get volunteers these days. In fact, you're better off telling people they're going to do a job and let them get on with it. So life has changed, and nothing is forever. I think we need to find a way to get more people involved in motorsport. Young people are not involved, mainly because they think they can't do it on many occasions, and I see that in other car clubs that I am in. Once again, you look around and you say, what's the future? There doesn't appear to be one coming along, so it's slipping away from us. And I know in talking to some of the drivers back in those days, we don't know their story, and we're about to lose it. So we really need to do something about getting together a team that'll go and talk to these people and so on, and give them our story, because the history of motorsport is slipping away. And talking about that, we're celebrating 60 years of one aspect of the club, but also we should be celebrating 30 years of being here. 30 years ago I signed the contract for this building, and that changed the way we operated because out at Beulah Park where we were, and nobody knew this, they were about to put a line around our club rooms which said Heritage Zone, and that would have been the end of us out there. So I knew that from a friend in the government, and that enabled us to come here. There was a committee formed to look for a new club rooms. It wasn't actually formed. The day after I became president, Reg Sparks phoned me up, and Reg, as a club manager, he really had the game by the horns, you might say. Nothing slipped past him, and he was going to make sure that he controlled me, and that was fine. That was fine. So he called me up. He said, "John, what are we going to do?" Key word, we. And I said, "Reg, we're going to form a committee to get a new club rooms. Here's a list of the people. By the way, Dean Rainsford, I want to be president. There's 2 others I want in there, and the rest is your opinion." So that's how it was formed, and they went ahead and did their job. This building was noted as being a possibility, but it was too dear, 800,000. Sounds like peanuts today, but John Ellis certainly wanted us to come here, and I had his opinion that the building was a good buy, as it was. But one day, and I was getting towards the end of my presidency, and I promised the members that we would achieve a new club rooms within 2 years. So a few months to go, and we're in trouble, really. So I bumped into some people in the street who I knew worked for the mortgagee in possession here, and one day, and we're talking away about financial things, and one of them said, "Well, what's wrong with that club you're in? They haven't bought the building out on King William Road." I said, "Well, the major problem is that you want 800 and they buy it for 600. 3 months later it was ours." So once again, the luck of the draw, I don't really know, because subsequent to that, the person who did own this place as a restaurant threatened legal action because they'd failed to achieve the highest possible price for the sale of the building. So things had to be kept pretty quiet about who might have done what. But along the way, once again, it's the officials and the helpers within the club that has kept it all together, that makes it possible for people to race these cars. And I've got to say that these cars that are here today, it's the best I've ever seen them. They've never looked so good. So really, we are doing quite well, but we need to consider the fact that professionalism in motorsport, professionalism in anything, eventually means it gets beyond those who started the movement. And we're at that stage now where we're talking about something different other than what's happening around us in the world. And while nothing is forever, things will pass us by if we let them pass us by. So back to the officials, don't disregard officials. They're the roots and basis of anything we might do, and we desperately need to train more of them. And today's an example that there's no really young people here today. And oh, I'm sorry, yes. And that's a state of mind, isn't it? Yeah. So perhaps we can have one of these some other day about some other thing that's happened, and certainly I had quite a bit to do with doing a recreation of the Victor Harbour races, and in the end it became too hard, mainly due to people within the club here of getting in my way, but and I shouldn't joke about that. I should have pushed on and pushed them aside, but nonetheless, the Victor Harbour race, that had 50,000 people at it claimed, so they were getting crowds in those days, which we would find unbelievable in actual fact, but certainly I've got a copy of the advertiser which says 50,000 people, and I've got photographs which would make you believe that maybe that was possible, but we'll never see a reenactment of Victor Harbour, which I was trying to do. Not to mention the stoplights they put in Port Elliot, which would be a nuisance, but all things that we might have done in the past, in many cases, are now beyond us because the public don't care about what we do, and it's a different world. So we need to get some of these officials back to come and tell some stories, because as a group of people within the club, and they weren't all club members, I might add either, We had great times, and I didn't like to talk about the parties at Malala afterwards. And the late Ken Virgin doing chin-ups in the old club rooms, and he wasn't the only character around the place. And once again, we had a movement or a sport which was almost unique in its camaraderie and so on. And the fact at the end of the day, everybody was an equal. There were no special people. There were characters, and that doesn't happen today. You know, if Alan Moffat was racing today, you wouldn't get within 100 miles of him. But in those days, you could just walk up and say good day. It's all gone, but nonetheless, we need to relive the moment, and that's what we've done today. Thank you.